The people who judge you first are often the least prepared for the truth. The rain had stopped just before sunrise, leaving the streets of Ashcroft, Ohio washed clean beneath a pale golden sky. But inside the city's central police precinct, old habits lingered more stubbornly than yesterday's storm. Officers drifted through the front lobby carrying coffee cups and unfinished conversations, trading jokes that echoed beneath fluorescent lights while the front desk buzzed with the routine rhythm of another weekday. Nobody seemed to notice the woman walking slowly toward the entrance. She wore a charcoal blazer, carried a simple leather portfolio, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years earning respect instead of demanding it. Danielle Brooks paused for a brief moment before pushing open the heavy glass door, taking in every detail with calm eyes. The worn reception counter, the faded department flag, the bulletin board crowded with outdated notices. She had read every performance report before arriving, every complaint, every commendation, every resignation. On paper, this precinct looked efficient. Between the lines, it told a very different story. Danielle had been warned that changing this department would not be easy, but she believed leadership began by seeing people as they truly were, not as they wished to appear. That was why she had declined the official welcome ceremony. No motorcade, no press conference, no escort from City Hall. She wanted her first impression to be honest. She wanted to see how people behaved before they knew who was watching. At that exact moment, 3 white officers stepped out of the hallway near the briefing room, laughing loudly about something that had happened during the night shift. Sergeant Ryan Walker led the group with the effortless confidence of a man who believed the building belonged to him. Officer Eric Coleman followed with a grin that rarely faded, while Officer Nathan Briggs glanced toward Danielle with visible skepticism. Their conversation stopped the instant they noticed her standing near the reception desk. Ryan looked her up and down before speaking. "Can we help you?" His tone sounded polite enough, but his expression suggested the opposite. Danielle offered a calm smile. "Good morning. I'm here for work." Ryan folded his arms. "Work?" Eric chuckled quietly. Nathan shook his head. "You're in the wrong place." Danielle remained composed. "I don't believe I am." Ryan took a slow step forward, his smile disappearing. "This area is restricted. Employees only." Danielle met his eyes without raising her voice. "I understand." Ryan interpreted her calmness as defiance. The lobby grew strangely quiet as several employees looked up from their desks. Nobody spoke. Nobody intervened. Danielle reached into her portfolio, intending to present the identification she had been instructed to keep private until the scheduled staff meeting upstairs. Before she could finish the motion, Ryan abruptly brushed her hand aside with a dismissive slap meant to stop her from reaching for the folder. The sound echoed across the silent lobby. Danielle neither stepped back nor raised her voice. She simply lowered her hand and looked at each officer one by one, memorizing every face, every reaction, and every person who chose silence over fairness. None of them realized that the woman standing before them had not come looking for a job. She had come to lead the entire department before the sun set on her very first day. Danielle let the silence settle instead of filling it with anger. Years of public service had taught her that the loudest moments often revealed the quiet truths people spent years trying to hide. Around the lobby, conversations resumed in uneasy whispers. A dispatcher glanced toward her before quickly lowering her eyes to a computer screen. A young records clerk looked as though she wanted to say something, but hesitation won. The building itself seemed frozen between routine and uncertainty. Ryan Walker straightened his uniform with complete confidence, convinced he had protected his precinct from an unwelcome visitor. "I am going to ask you one last time," he said evenly. "Leave before this becomes a bigger problem." Danielle looked at him with remarkable composure. "Are you certain that is your final decision?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Absolutely." She gave a respectful nod, as though acknowledging an answer she had expected all along. Without another word, she closed her leather portfolio and rested both hands calmly in front of her. The gesture confused everyone watching. Most people argued. Some demanded supervisors. Others insisted on explaining themselves. This woman did none of those things. She simply waited. Across the second floor, a conference room had begun filling with command staff from across the city. Coffee steamed from paper cups while digital projectors hummed quietly against the far wall. Captain Laura Mitchell checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Has anyone heard from Commander Brooks? She asked. Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz shook his head. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Another administrator frowned. The mayor will be here in less than 15 minutes. We cannot begin without her. Back downstairs, Ryan knew nothing about the growing concern upstairs. He turned toward Eric Coleman with a satisfied grin. Some people think confidence gets them anywhere. Eric laughed softly. Nathan Briggs leaned against the reception counter. She probably walked into the wrong government building. A few nearby officers forced polite smiles, but not everyone shared their amusement. Officer Emily Foster had only joined the department 8 months earlier. Standing near the report desk, she watched Danielle carefully. There was something unusual about the woman. Not fear, not frustration, just patience. Emily had seen nervous visitors before. This was different. Danielle carried herself like someone accustomed to responsibility. Her posture never changed. Her breathing remained steady. Even after being dismissed, she looked neither embarrassed nor intimidated. Emily quietly stepped closer to the receptionist. Did anyone ask her name? She whispered. The receptionist blinked. No. Emily looked back toward Danielle. Maybe somebody should. Before either woman could continue, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A sharply dressed executive assistant hurried into the lobby carrying a tablet and scanning every face with growing concern. Has anyone seen Commander Danielle Brooks? She called. Several heads turned instinctively, including Ryan's. He answered before anyone else could speak. No commander has checked in. The assistant frowned. That cannot be right. She was scheduled to arrive 20 minutes ago. Ryan shrugged confidently. Whoever she is late. The assistant looked around once more, her eyes moving across the lobby until they rested on the quiet woman standing only a few yards away. Danielle returned the glance with the slightest hint of a knowing smile, but she remained perfectly silent, allowing the next few seconds to unfold exactly as they were meant to. The executive assistant stopped in the middle of the lobby, studying Danielle for a long second as though recognizing a familiar face from a photograph she had memorized only hours earlier. Before she could say another word, her tablet vibrated. She glanced down, listened briefly through a wireless earpiece, then looked back up with renewed urgency. Everyone from the executive meeting is waiting, she said, still scanning the room. Ryan Walker stepped forward before Danielle had any opportunity to respond. Ma'am, we have not seen the new commander. This woman just wandered in without authorization. The assistant frowned politely. Did you ask for identification? Ryan answered with absolute confidence. It was not necessary. Danielle remained completely still, her expression calm enough to unsettle the people around her more than any angry response could have. Imagine standing there while strangers decided who you were before asking a single question. Imagine knowing the truth could change the entire room, yet choosing patience instead. Danielle had learned years ago that character was revealed most clearly when people believed there would be no consequences for their choices. The assistant looked from Ryan to Danielle once again, uncertainty crossing her face. Before she could continue, another elevator opened. This time Captain Laura Mitchell hurried into the lobby with Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz only a step behind her. Both had left the conference room after realizing every passing minute delayed the official transition of leadership. Laura scanned the entrance anxiously. We have checked every office, she said. The mayor will arrive any minute. Samuel nodded. The commissioner wants everyone upstairs immediately. Ryan answered with a casual shrug. We are handling a visitor who refuses to leave. Laura barely acknowledged his explanation. Her attention drifted toward Danielle, whose composed posture contrasted sharply with the growing tension surrounding everyone else. Something about the woman seemed strangely familiar, not because they had met before, but because she matched the professional portrait included in the confidential appointment packet distributed to senior command the previous evening. Laura searched her memory, replaying the image she had studied before going home. Dark blazer, leather portfolio, calm expression, confident posture. The similarities became impossible to ignore. She took one careful step closer. Danielle offered nothing more than a courteous smile. No introduction, no interruption, just quiet confidence. Upstairs, the conference room continued filling with department leaders from neighboring districts. Conversations had shifted from routine scheduling to whispered speculation. Some wondered whether the incoming commander had encountered unexpected traffic. Others questioned whether City Hall had changed the schedule without notice. Commissioner Harold Bennett stood near the windows overlooking the parking lot, checking his watch once again. Commander Brooks has never been late to a professional obligation, he said firmly. If she has not arrived, there is a reason. Back in the lobby, Ryan folded his arms again, still unaware that every passing second carried him closer to an uncomfortable truth. Officer Emily Foster noticed Laura's expression change from curiosity to quiet concern. "Captain," Emily said carefully, "are you all right?" Laura did not answer immediately. Her eyes never left Danielle. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me something," she said gently. "Would you happen to be Danielle Brooks?" The entire lobby fell silent once again, and for the first time that morning, Ryan Walker felt the certainty he had carried so confidently begin to slip away. Danielle held Captain Laura Mitchell's gaze for several quiet seconds before answering with the same calm confidence she had carried since walking through the front door. "Yes," she said gently. "My name is Danielle Brooks." No one spoke. The words seemed to suspend time itself. Ryan Walker stared at her, waiting for someone to laugh, someone to explain that this was some elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, Captain Mitchell's expression shifted immediately. She stood a little straighter, extending her hand with unmistakable respect. "Commander Brooks," she said sincerely, "I am very sorry for the delay. We have been looking for you throughout the building." Danielle accepted the handshake with a warm but measured smile. "Good morning, Captain." The executive assistant released a quiet breath of relief. "Commander, the mayor, the commissioner, and the command staff are waiting for you upstairs." Around the lobby, the atmosphere transformed without anyone raising a voice. Conversation stopped. Officers who had barely acknowledged Danielle only moments earlier suddenly found themselves avoiding eye contact. Ryan's confidence disappeared beneath visible uncertainty. He looked toward Eric Coleman, hoping for reassurance, but Eric looked equally unsettled. Nathan Briggs shifted his weight awkwardly, replaying every word they had spoken since Danielle arrived. Imagine believing you knew exactly who someone was, only to discover you had never asked the simplest question. Danielle could have reminded them of every dismissive remark. She could have pointed out every assumption that had filled the room. Instead, she did something far more unexpected. She simply picked up her portfolio and thanked Captain Mitchell for coming downstairs. Her composure unsettled Ryan more than any angry confrontation could have. As the group walked toward the elevator, Officer Emily Foster quietly stepped aside, allowing Danielle to pass. "Commander," she said softly, "welcome to Ashcroft." Danielle smiled. "Thank you, Officer Foster." Emily noticed something important in that brief exchange. Danielle had read her name tag. She had paid attention. She saw people. That realization stayed with Emily long after the elevator doors closed. Inside the elevator, silence filled the space. The executive assistant reviewed the morning schedule on her tablet, while Captain Mitchell apologized once more for the confusion downstairs. Danielle listened without interruption. "Captain," she finally said, "today has already been very informative." Laura lowered her eyes for a moment. "I understand." Danielle looked toward the glowing floor indicator as the elevator climbed. "Sometimes the first hour tells you more about an organization than 6 months of reports." Upstairs, Commissioner Harold Bennett stood as the elevator doors opened. Relief crossed his face the moment he saw Danielle. "Commander Brooks," he said, extending both hands. "Welcome. We have been eager to meet you." Danielle greeted him warmly before shaking hands with the mayor and the senior leadership gathered around the conference table. Every introduction reflected courtesy, professionalism, and genuine respect. Yet even as the meeting prepared to begin, Danielle's thoughts briefly returned to the quiet lobby below. She remembered the receptionist who remained silent, the young officer whose instincts urged compassion, the captain who recognized the truth before anyone else, and the 3 officers who had judged her before learning her name. She understood that changing policies would be difficult, but changing habits would be even harder. Outside the conference room windows, sunlight spread across the city as the morning finally settled into place. Downstairs, Ryan Walker remained standing exactly where Danielle had left him, staring toward the closed elevator doors, slowly realizing that the person he had dismissed only minutes earlier now occupied the highest office in the entire precinct, and that the first impression he had chosen to make would never be forgotten. The conference room settled into an attentive silence as Commissioner Harold Bennett welcomed every member of the leadership team before turning toward Danielle with a respectful smile. "Commander Brooks," he said, "this department has been waiting for someone willing to rebuild trust instead of simply protecting appearances. We are grateful you accepted this assignment." Danielle thanked him with quiet humility before taking her seat at the head of the long table. She did not open her portfolio immediately. Instead, she looked around the room, making eye contact with every captain, lieutenant, and civilian administrator present. Some smiled with confidence. Others appeared cautious, uncertain about the direction new leadership might bring. Danielle finally spoke. "Before we discuss goals, I would like to ask a simple question. What kind of department do you believe the people of Ashcroft deserve?" The room remained silent for several moments. Eventually, Captain Laura Mitchell answered first. "One that earns trust every day." Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz nodded. "One that treats every resident with the same respect." Danielle listened carefully, writing only a few brief notes. She appreciated policies and strategic plans, but she valued honesty even more. "Those are excellent answers," she said. "The challenge is making certain our actions match our words, especially when nobody believes they are being evaluated." Several leaders exchanged thoughtful glances, unaware of how directly those words reflected the events that had unfolded downstairs less than an hour earlier. Danielle reached into her portfolio and removed a neatly organized folder containing performance reports, community surveys, employee interviews, and independent audits collected over the previous 6 months. "These documents measure statistics," she explained. "Response times, staffing levels, training hours, citizen complaints, and budget efficiency all matter. But numbers rarely reveal culture. Culture appears in ordinary moments. It appears in first impressions. It appears in the choices people make when they believe nobody important is watching." Commissioner Bennett folded his hands, recognizing that Danielle had already learned something valuable before the meeting had even begun. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, Ryan Walker tried to return to his normal routine, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every conversation seemed quieter. Every glance from another officer felt heavier than before. Eric Coleman attempted to break the tension with a casual remark, yet even he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. Nathan Briggs stared at the floor, replaying the morning over and over in his mind. Officer Emily Foster quietly completed paperwork while thinking about Danielle's remarkable restraint. She realized that genuine authority often arrived without demanding attention. Upstairs, Danielle continued outlining her vision. "Accountability is not about embarrassing people," she said. "It is about creating an environment where fairness becomes the standard instead of the exception. Every person who enters this building should receive dignity before anyone knows their profession, their background, or their position." No one interrupted. Every sentence carried the steady confidence of someone who had spent years leading through example rather than intimidation. As sunlight filled the conference room windows, the atmosphere slowly shifted from routine administration to genuine reflection. Without mentioning a single name or describing what had happened in the lobby, Danielle had already begun teaching the first lesson of her leadership, and somewhere downstairs, 3 officers had no idea that the choices they believed were already behind them were about to become the foundation of a conversation that would change the entire department. The meeting concluded just before noon, but instead of retreating to her new office, Danielle Brooks requested a quiet walk through the building. Commissioner Harold Bennett offered to assign an escort, yet she politely declined. "If I am going to lead this department," she said with a calm smile, "I should first understand how it feels to move through it like everyone else." Together with Captain Laura Mitchell, she visited Dispatch, the Evidence Division, the Records Office, and the training room. Danielle greeted every employee the same way, whether they wore a command uniform or worked behind a computer screen. She asked names instead of titles. She listened more than she spoke. She thanked people for ordinary responsibilities that often went unnoticed. The atmosphere slowly changed. As word spread that the new commander was introducing herself one conversation at a time instead of delivering speeches from behind a closed office door. Imagine working in a place where someone finally noticed the people who rarely received recognition. Small moments like those have a way of revealing the true heartbeat of an organization. As they approached the patrol briefing area, Captain Mitchell quietly pointed toward a hallway lined with framed photographs of previous commanders. Every leader has left something behind, she said. Danielle studied the display carefully before answering. Buildings remember policies. People remember how they were treated. Laura nodded thoughtfully, realizing those words carried far greater meaning than any management seminar she had attended. Downstairs, Ryan Walker remained unusually quiet throughout the morning. Every routine task felt heavier than before. He noticed officers speaking more softly whenever he entered a room. Eric Coleman tried to convince himself the morning had simply been an unfortunate misunderstanding. "She never told us who she was," he said while organizing paperwork. Ryan replied without looking up. "We never asked." The sentence lingered between them longer than either man expected. Nathan Briggs sat silently nearby, replaying the encounter over and over. For the first time, each detail looked different. They had judged confidence as arrogance, patience as weakness, and silence as uncertainty. Officer Emily Foster watched the conversation from across the room without saying a word. She wondered how many similar moments had happened before she joined the department, moments that ended differently because the person walking through those doors never had the opportunity Danielle Brooks did. Upstairs, Danielle entered her new office for the first time. The room overlooked the downtown courthouse, where sunlight reflected across rows of brick buildings that had stood for generations. On the desk rested a neatly arranged stack of welcome letters from civic leaders, neighborhood organizations, and local schools. She read each one carefully before opening a small notebook she carried with her everywhere. At the top of the first page, she wrote a single sentence. "Culture is revealed before introductions are made." She paused for a moment, then added another line beneath it. "Leadership begins by noticing what others have learned to ignore." She closed the notebook and looked out the window, not with satisfaction, but with determination. The work ahead would not be measured only by reduced complaints or improved statistics. Success would depend on changing everyday decisions made in ordinary moments. Somewhere inside the building, people were already beginning to reconsider assumptions they had never questioned before, and Danielle understood that lasting change rarely arrived through dramatic announcements. More often, it began quietly, with uncomfortable reflection, honest accountability, and the courage to become better than yesterday. Late that afternoon, Danielle Brooks requested a meeting with every patrol supervisor, not to announce new rules, but to establish a new standard. The briefing room filled gradually as sergeants, lieutenants, and senior officers took their seats. Ryan Walker entered with Eric Coleman and Nathan Briggs a few moments before the meeting began. None of them spoke much during the walk upstairs. The confidence they had carried that morning had been replaced by uncertainty. Danielle stood near the front of the room without a podium or prepared speech. Behind her, a large display screen remained dark. She waited until every chair was occupied before speaking in a steady, measured voice. "Thank you all for being here. Today is my first day, and I believe first days reveal more than most people realize." The room became completely still. Danielle continued, "Every organization has policies. Every organization has procedures. But culture is created by the decisions people make when they believe no one important is watching." Ryan lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Those words landed with unmistakable weight. Danielle picked up a small remote control from the table. "Before discussing our future, I would like us to reflect on something that happened this morning." Without drama or accusation, she activated the display. Security camera. Footage from the front lobby appeared on the screen. There was no sound, only clear images showing the ordinary flow of people entering the building. The room watched as Danielle quietly walked through the front entrance carrying her leather portfolio. They watched Ryan approach her, followed by Eric and Nathan. They saw the brief exchange, the dismissive gesture that interrupted her attempt to present identification, the silent reactions from nearby employees, and the absence of anyone asking a simple question that could have changed everything. Danielle stopped the recording before replaying it. No one in the room spoke. Imagine watching your own choices from the perspective of someone else. Imagine realizing that a single moment, lasting less than 1 minute, revealed habits that years of training had failed to correct. Danielle turned away from the screen and looked across the room without anger. "This recording is not being shown to embarrass anyone," she said calmly. "It is being shown because it teaches an important lesson. The issue is not that someone failed to recognize a new commander. The issue is that respect should never depend upon recognizing a title. Several officers slowly nodded. Captain Laura Mitchell watched the room carefully and noticed expressions changing from discomfort to genuine reflection. Danielle continued, "Every resident who enters this building deserves to be treated with dignity before anyone knows their profession, their neighborhood, their appearance, or their position. If we cannot demonstrate that principle inside our own front lobby, we cannot expect the community to believe we practice it outside these walls." Ryan finally raised his eyes. For the first time that day, he understood that the greatest mistake had not been failing to identify the new commander. It had been allowing assumptions to replace professionalism. Danielle placed the remote back on the table and allowed a quiet silence to settle across the room. Sometimes the strongest lesson does not come from punishment. Sometimes it comes from seeing the truth exactly as it happened, with no excuses left to hide behind. The room remained silent long after the security footage disappeared from the screen. No one rushed to defend themselves. No one searched for an explanation that could erase what everyone had just witnessed. Danielle Brooks looked across the gathering with the same calm expression she had worn since the beginning of the day. "Accountability," she said quietly, "is not about finding someone to blame. It is about deciding who we choose to become after the truth is impossible to ignore." Those words settled over the room more heavily than any formal reprimand. Commissioner Harold Bennett slowly stood beside her. "Commander Brooks and I have already discussed the next steps," he announced. "An administrative review will examine the incident this morning, not because of anyone's position, but because every interaction inside this department must reflect the standards we expect outside these walls." Ryan Walker felt every eye in the room shift, if only for a moment. He had spent years believing experience alone earned respect. Now he realized respect had to be demonstrated one decision at a time. Eric Coleman lowered his head, remembering how easily he had laughed instead of asking a simple question. Nathan Briggs quietly replayed the moment when he had chosen to follow another person's assumptions instead of relying on his own judgment. Danielle continued without raising her voice. "This review is not limited to 3 individuals. I also want us to examine our training, our hiring practices, our mentoring, and the culture that influences everyday decisions. Systems do not change simply because one person makes a mistake. Systems change when everyone accepts responsibility for improving them." Imagine hearing that after expecting anger. Imagine preparing for humiliation and receiving an invitation to become better instead. Sometimes mercy requires more courage than punishment. Captain Laura Mitchell looked around the room and saw officers listening more carefully than they had during any mandatory briefing she could remember. Nobody appeared distracted. Nobody checked a phone or glanced toward the clock. Every person understood this conversation would define the future of the department far more than any policy manual. Danielle invited questions, but for several seconds no one spoke. Finally, Ryan stood. His voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "Commander Brooks," he said, "I cannot change what happened this morning. I can only acknowledge that I made assumptions before showing the professionalism this badge requires. For that, I am sincerely sorry." The room remained completely still. Danielle looked at him with steady composure. "Acknowledging a mistake is the beginning," she replied. "Learning from it is what protects the next person who walks through those doors." Ryan nodded slowly before taking his seat. There was no applause, no dramatic confrontation, only a shared understanding that meaningful change rarely arrived through grand speeches. It began with honest reflection followed by consistent action. As the meeting concluded, Danielle handed Captain Mitchell a proposal for expanded leadership workshops, community engagement sessions, and practical training focused on respectful communication during everyday encounters. "This department already has talented people," Danielle said. "Now we must ensure our culture reflects the values we promised the public." One by one, officers left the briefing room in thoughtful silence. The building itself felt different than it had only hours earlier. The walls had not changed. The uniforms had not changed. Yet something far more important had begun to shift. For the first time in a long while, the conversation inside Ashcroft Central Police Precinct was no longer about authority alone. It was about earning trust, protecting dignity, and making certain that the next first impression would tell a far better story than the last. Several weeks later, The morning sun rose over Ashcroft with the same quiet promise it had offered on Danielle Brooks's first day, but inside Central Police Precinct, the atmosphere had changed in ways no report could fully measure. Visitors entering the lobby were greeted with eye contact before questions, courtesy before assumptions, and professionalism before judgment. New training sessions had become part of every supervisor's schedule, not because regulations demanded them, but because the people inside the building had finally understood why they mattered. Danielle often walked through the department without announcing herself, stopping to thank dispatchers, record specialists, maintenance staff, and patrol officers alike. She believed respect should never flow only from the top down. It had to move in every direction if trust was ever going to become real. Ryan Walker noticed those changes every single day. The lessons from that first morning never left him. Instead of avoiding responsibility, he volunteered to help lead discussions with younger officers about professional conduct and unbiased decision-making. During one session, a rookie asked what had changed his perspective. Ryan paused before answering honestly. "I learned that the easiest person to misjudge is the one you never take the time to know." The room remained quiet as every officer considered those words. Eric Coleman and Nathan Briggs also embraced the opportunity to rebuild trust through consistent actions instead of empty promises. They participated in neighborhood meetings, visited local schools, and listened to residents whose experiences with law enforcement had not always inspired confidence. None of those conversations erased the past, but each one created another opportunity to build a better future. Imagine walking into a public building where the first thing you receive is dignity instead of doubt. Imagine how different an entire community can feel when simple respect becomes a daily habit rather than an occasional gesture. One afternoon, Officer Emily Foster knocked on Danielle's office door, carrying a folder of community feedback collected during the previous month. "Commander," she said with a smile, "compliments about front desk interactions have increased more than anyone expected." Danielle accepted the report without celebrating the numbers too quickly. "Progress is encouraging," she replied, "but character is measured by consistency. We keep earning trust one conversation at a time." Emily nodded, realizing that true leadership never viewed success as a finish line. Before leaving, she glanced toward the notebook resting on Danielle's desk. The first page remained open to the same sentence written on the commander's first day. "Culture is revealed before introductions are made." Danielle had not crossed it out because it still guided every decision she made. As evenings settled across Ashcroft, employees gradually headed home while the lights inside the precinct reflected softly against the front windows. The building looked exactly as it had weeks before, yet the people inside carried themselves differently. They had discovered that authority alone could enforce rules, but only integrity could inspire respect. Danielle locked her office, walked through the quiet lobby one final time, and paused briefly at the entrance where her journey had begun. She smiled, not because the work was finished, but because it had truly begun. The door closed gently behind her as the city settled into another peaceful night, leaving one lesson echoing far beyond the walls of a single police station. A badge may represent authority, but character is what gives that authority its honor. And the strongest form of justice begins long before anyone learns your name.